This is the Hagmann and Hagmann Report for today. It is Monday, July 8th, 2013. This is a live broadcast. I'm Doug Hagmann, co-host along with my son Joe Hagmann. Together we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. With me in studio, he is sitting right next to me here, or about 5 feet from me. Together we are going to be bringing you 3 hours of unbiased and uncensored news that you're not going to get elsewhere. Information, analysis, you're not going to get elsewhere. We've got a tremendous show lined up for you, but before we get into the actual details of the show, folks, the new listeners, and we've heard from listeners today. I'm going to say hello to Kay out of Utah, from Jim from Washington State, and a few others that are listening all across the United States. Pam from the United Kingdom, new listener, welcome. Of course, Karen from Rome, welcome. Jim from Colombia. Mark from Panama. Actually, the country of Panama. So we're reaching all sorts of countries, states, and areas. I want to say thank you so much for listening. You're listening to the only show where the news is presented to you in 3D. We look beyond the headlines and bylines, of course, and bring you the news behind the news. For the new listeners, we broadcast live each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. You can find us. Our home base on the Internet is HomelandSecurityUS.com. That's HomelandSecurityUS.com. We're also simulcast by the Christians United Broadcasting Network. That's the Christians United Broadcasting Network. There you can find us at the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. You have to spell it out. And Hagmann is Hagmann, and of course you have to spell the word and. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us, and thank you for your continued belief and trust in us as we walk through this minefield of current events together. Joe, I'll tell you what, it's been a wild day, actually. It's been a wild month, but today seems like it's really been a wild day with respect to what you did, radio show just for an hour and a half, I believe, right?
Yes, that was on Dr. Mackey's Tribulation News, and that was a great show, and just a whole bunch of people that there's been a lot of shows that have been coming up, and people that have been doing shows on things that are very important, from spiritual warfare to what's going on in the world. I just really like to see that people are out there doing stuff, making a difference, and that's how you can really make a difference. You can, as I said in the show, lead a horse to water. You can't make him drink, but if you're doing your job and leading that horse to water, that's all you have, need to do.
Well, one of the things that I want to say is we've got so many headlines that are hitting us, and so many news stories, and so many people that are sending out alerts. And you get these alerts, and you look at them and you think, well, is this true? And I can't, and I'm being serious when I say this, ladies and gentlemen. I have received so many emails with the question, is this true? And then a link. And, 9 times out of 10, it's the same article or just a number of different articles that have to do with the incrementalism to a tyrannical state. Of course, that is true in its larger sense. We are headed for a tyrannical state, and part of that, folks, I can tell you something real quick here, because Joe's got a 2-minute sound clip. For the second 2 hours of the show, we are going to be joined by a very special guest. And if you would have told me, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, that I'd be even entertaining this subject, I would have laughed. But the fact is this. We're going to have Scott Stevens on. He's a meteorologist, and the subject is going to be chemtrails. Now you might think, okay, come on.
Chemtrails, geoengineering, what is being done in the skies, what is the effects they are having, the weather wars.
Yes.
The subject, and his website is weatherwars.info.
Yeah, weatherwars.info. If you want to cue that up or play that, folks, listen to this as kind of a teaser for the second and third hours, because you're going to want to stick with this. I got to tell you, like I said, I was a skeptic until I reread Weather Wars by Steve Quayle, and also looked at his website, looked at his street creds. Scott Stevens has got the credibility to speak on this subject. He was in the he's a meteorologist. He's in the business. He understands weather better than anyone I know. And I got to tell you, weatherwars.info has got a ton of information. And I spent quite a bit of time looking at it. But if you want to go ahead and cue that up, take a listen.
There's so many agendas, though. There's so many purposes for these trails, so many things that they can be used to do. That, you know, whether it's surveillance, whether it's bouncing signals, so they can travel great distances across the curve of the Earth, inhibit or create like this metallic shield that UFOs have to pass through, so they get an alert when dimensional craft move through these electrified plates that are nanoparticles or clouds in the sky. My time-lapse surveillance has shown me that the clouds, the trails, deform. They change shape after they leave the plane. They don't stay in a straight line. They don't stay, in a uniform parcel of atmosphere. There's different parcels of atmosphere. The atmosphere has been cut and sliced up, and each segment, each digit, each cell behaves somewhat differently than the surrounding cells.
Wow.
And they need these trails run across the cells so they can see whether these individual cells are expanding, contracting, moving sideways, moving vertically, moving, in the vertical dimension or horizontally. And they can keep track of all of that. And there is no shortage of computing power that they have been able to secure over the last 50 years to have some mother system running it all. And so they need to essentially just put in, they want rains, heavy mother effing rains all across the east, and the system says, all right, how many days do you want before that rain starts? And then it figures out a way to create the jet stream to conform to the shape which will generate said weather.
Wow.
And so what I'm going to do tonight is there's a huge operation going off in the Pacific, and I'm going to do a little screencast off of that, so it'll be up and on the site before we air tonight.
Wow.
So there is massive engineering, 1,000 to 2,000 miles off the California coast right now.
And that was a snippet of what Scott Stevens on another show. He has been a guest on Coast to Coast, apparently, from one of the listeners. I've seen them put in the chat room. And this is while he was on a news TV station. He has since went away from that, and he is more of the alternative news now. And we will get into that with him in the next hour.
Yeah, and one thing I want to say, Joe and listeners, as we look at things, before we get into the news, that we're going to cover between now and the top of the next hour. I was a great skeptic about chemtrails and about what weather wars, what's going on, and how it affects us. But here's the deal. Joe and I were talking about this earlier. In fact, Mitch, who did the 2-minute sound clip, our producer, when he was talking with Scott, kind of talked about this. And you know how we were talking. Have you been feeling kind of, I don't know, tired, kind of sluggish lately? Well, Nick Begich, and I want to thank Mary Ann for providing us with this book, Controlling the Human Mind. Dr. Nick Begich had written something in about the body as a subatomic nanomicrocircuit. What that means is the body as basically a computer and how it is affected by external stimuli. And, for example, the stuff that gets sprayed. In the past it was assumed that chemical reactions in the fabric of the molecules direct the flow of signals and the transfer of energy in living systems. Instead, this old idea has been shown to be driven by the underlying processes of energy exchange at the atomic level and below that then affect the chemistry of all living things. So is being said by Dr. Begich is actually being demonstrated and said by our upcoming guest. Now, within living cells, there are proteins that have specific three-dimensional physical characteristics and forms. Now, you might think, well, why in the world are you talking about this? Well, the form of proteins arise out of their unique order of amino acids. The form of proteins arise out of their unique order of amino acids, electrical charge, and polarity. All right? Now think about that for a second. Okay, you done thinking about that? All right, the sequences of amino acids have been found to coil or wind themselves into helical spiraling shape, called an alpha helix. What's our DNA shape like, by the way? Exactly, helix, double helix. In electrical terms, coils and helices are inductors, transducers, and antennas. Now, think about the human DNA and think about the body harmonics. Are we not somewhat, is our DNA kind of, could it not be like antennae? I think so. Anyway, these can change shape and act as on and off switches or perform different binary functions, which are required for any computer to work, whether it's your desktop or whether it's a human body functioning as a supercomputer. You know what I'm talking about. Now, these coils and helixes are biological circuits serving the same functions as non-living electrical circuits. So what I'm telling you is your body is like a giant living supercomputer that is, can be, and is affected by the external junk that you encounter on a daily basis. Now enter into the equation whatever it is they're spraying, and we're going to hear about this in the second and third hour. But just to end this and wrap this up here, it's been shown that by adding energy directly into the human body in the right forms, the overall energy level of the body can be affected both in a positive sense and in a negative sense. So what's being discovered is that these biophysical processes is what we are now referring to as the nanotronic nutrient effects. Yeah, that sounds like a whole lot of big words, but it's really either a device or a dietary compound that serves as a delivery system for frequency modulated effects. In other words, it affects the frequency of our bodies. An example, just real quick, would be the use of 5 nanometer gold particles combined with insulin and aspartic acid, an amino acid. The acid produces a charge that allows the insulin to adhere to or through electrostatic interactions. The result was a nasal spray. Now listen to this. The result was a nasal spray that reduced blood sugar levels 55% in 2 hours in tests on rats. See, this method could emerge as a new platform for delivering drugs that otherwise must be injected because they break down in the stomach. And you know what I'm talking about. You take pills, for example, you've got that breakdown as soon as they reach the stomach. Well, this, of course, through your mucous membranes in your nose, in your mouth, your eyes even. There are a lot of ways to get the right things to happen in living things. It's possible to induce energy transfers, which result in improved health or decreased health because of the way the organic molecules as nutrients, trace elements, and other substances are used by our bodies. So even the use of light, sound, and you folks, I know you've felt this too. Think about lighting, dim lighting, fluorescent lighting, the different kinds of lighting, different sounds, for example. What about the microwave and radio and TV networks and everything that's going on around you and through you and pounding off you? Well, all of this, for example, computer systems, power grids, all of which provide these pulse-modulated signals. And if you think about it, they can affect you in ways that you would not even know you're being affected. They would impact living organisms, either in a neutral manner, in other words, they'd have no effect, or a positive or negative way. And this is what I've found, in addition to the weather aspect of these spraying of what's being sprayed. This is what I found to be the case with chemtrails. It's kind of like a dual-use system, if you will. So we're going to be getting into that the second and third hours. I just think it's fascinating. Again, a couple of years ago, I would have laughed at that, and I think I might have laughed at that. None anymore. Not after seeing what's going on. And by the way, what Scott was talking about, Mitch, where our producer lives, this is happening in his neighborhood. When I say his neighborhood, not too far from him. And it's happening where you live. I don't care if you live on the East Coast or the West Coast or North or South in Canada or whatever country you live in. This is taking place. So I'm excited about this. Joe had tried to talk to me about this a year or so ago, and I just wouldn't hear it. Right? I mean, you told me about this.
Yeah, we would talk about it, but Stan Dale really he addresses some of this stuff not in great detail in his book Cosmic Conspiracy, and we haven't got into this with him too much on the show, but there is a lot of different things, outside forces, energetic forces, electromagnetic particles, electromagnetic pulses that affect the body and the way it functions. And we are going to be learning about these through our guest tonight and through, I see in the near future, some kind of disclosure or just some kinds of openness as we see these new reports being put out by governments of how they monitor people through different things. We know that RFID dust, they have this dust or these things they can use to track pretty much anything. They use it in their chemtrail spraying, from what I understand, and it's a very interesting and complex and scary subject, because who knows how far this really goes when they use it and the way they use it.
Or has gone, you know, and that's something that we're going to get into. So stay tuned for hours 2 and 3, Scott Stevens. It's going to be a great 2 hours, that's for sure. And I want to thank Mitch for setting that up for us.
Yeah, we got news out of Egypt we're going to start with. We have at least 51 people were killed on Monday when the Egyptian army opened fire on supporters of ousted President Morsi in the deadliest incident since the elected Islamist leader was toppled by the military 5 days ago. The protesters said shooting started as they performed morning prayers outside the Cairo barracks where Morsi is believed to be held. But military spokesman Ahmed Ali said that at 4 a.m., armed men attacked troops in the area around the Republican Guard compound in the northeast of the city. The armed forces always deal with the issues very wisely, but there is certainly also a limit to patience. The uniformed Ali told news conference at which he presented what he said was video evidence, some of it apparently taken out of a helicopter. Emergency services says 435 people were wounded. This is an increasing problem. We are seeing these in the Middle East. It's just heating up to the point where it's going to boil over everywhere.
Well, exactly, and we're looking at Egyptian politics. If you look at the politics of Egypt as it stands right now, as it has grown, it's come from the Sunni Shia civil war that really is enveloped the entire Muslim world, or has enveloped the entire Muslim world for millennia. I mean, since forever. But it took just 2 days for the interim government installed last week by Egypt's military to announce that Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states would provide emergency financing for Egypt. Now, they don't even have a prime minister, basically. But they really don't need a prime minister. They've got a finance minister. And, that's good enough, right? A finance minister with a Rolodex in Riyadh. Now, the finance ministry has intensified its contacts in a number of ways with Gulf states to stand on the volume of financial aid announced. Now, see, the complications that we're seeing right now, you've got Egypt's central bank governor, Hisham Ramez. He's out drumming up badly needed financial support. You've got the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates pledging, but not yet providing, $8 billion in loans to Egypt because the Saudi monarchy hates and fears the Muslim Brotherhood, as it should. Now, think about that. Whose side are we on in this conflict? Are we seeing a rift here? I think we are. Now, the Saudis also have another reason to get involved in Egypt, and that's, of course, Syria. Folks, we've talked about Syria. We've talked about it as the start of the Third World War, and you'll have to apologize my stammering there. I'm trying to work this out mentally and thinking how this could possibly play out for the good. It's not going to.
No,
not at all.
We now have the Daily Caller has an article, and I've heard it's amazing. I have not been not paying attention to certain news on purpose, but this piece, law requires Obama administration to cut off Egyptian aid. The $1.5 billion in U.S. foreign aid slated for Egypt next year is in jeopardy after the Egyptian army disposed of the elected Morsi on Wednesday. Section 508 of the decades-old Foreign Assistance Act stipulates that none of the funds appropriated or otherwise made available pursuant to this act shall be obligated or expended to finance directly assist any country whose duly elected head of government is disposed by a military coup or decree. Now, okay.
Yeah, okay.
Now, there's a point to this, because I saw another headline today, and this I'm pulling up right now. This makes sense to why the Obama administration won't call it a coup.
Okay.
And that's a story in itself. It is
because that's important.
Foreign policy. Yeah. Fending off a flurry of direct questions, officials at the White House and State Department on Monday refused to characterize last week's events in Egypt as a military coup. Though officials did not dispute that the fact that Morsi, democratically elected leader, was ousted by the military, they would not say the word coup, which is an important legal consequence for the $1.5 billion in aid Congress sends to Egypt every year.
And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, our government was involved in many coup takeovers of countries in South America, Central America.
No,
of course. But getting back to Egypt, here's the deal. As far as I'm concerned, okay, and other analysts as well. Whether Egypt itself slides into a continual state of chaos or at least somehow regains some semblance of stability, even under the military, you know where it's all going to, what does it depend on? Do you know where and what it depends on? It depends on what happens in the royal palace in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, not Tahrir Square. See, the Saudis, it would appear, they've embraced the military-backed government, whoever it turns out to include. So it's conceivable that the Saudis vetoed the ascension, for example, of El-Baradi, who was described as a liberal by the corporate media. El-Baradi is a very unprincipled man who did great damage to Western interests, and of course, I think he even won a Nobel Prize for the damage he did to Western interests. But as head of the International Atomic Energy Agency until 2009, El-Baradi repeatedly intervened and distorted his own inspectors' reports about the Iranian nuclear program. So, in essence, he acted as an agent of Iran, or an Iranian agent of influence, if you will. There you have it. So it all rests right now with the Saudis. And who are we? Who is the United States? Who appears to be the United States puppet master but Saudi Arabia? So who better can influence the goings on in Egypt, the events in Egypt, than Saudi Arabia? But who's pulling our strings? It's Riyadh as well. So we should have all eyes, in this case, on Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, all eyes on the royal family. That's where the power lies at this point. And again, with Syria as well. Because with Syria, the United States was doing and continues to do the bidding for Saudi Arabia. The United States is doing the bidding for Saudi Arabia through arms, weapons shipments, through training, and now, and folks, watch, because World War III, the fuse has been lit for a third world war. Now, I'd like to think that through the exposure, through the enlightenment of Benghazi, by exposing what Benghazi really was, some of that was stopped, or at least slowed down. And instead of maybe having 5,000 or 10,000 dead NATO troops, or dead American troops, more accurately, we don't have that today. So it's through the exposure that this is being slowed down. And speaking of that, speaking of exposure, once again, the Hagmann report remains the target of exposure. If you go to CanadaFreePress.com or Neighbors to the North, there's an article about the NSA. They, of course, denied Freedom of Information Act requests on me, about me. There's an article there at CanadaFreePress.com about that. I am now known.
You?
No, of course not. I am now known as, you can just call me case number 70900. Okay, that's my file number. I am NSA case number 7900. So, and I'm angry, by the way. I'm angry because there's a 3-page response issued by the NSA about their spying activities on me, not only as an investigator, on us, actually, Joe and I, not only as investigators and investigative journalists, but as American citizens. Now, folks, this is so huge, but don't think for one moment, and Joe and I were talking about this earlier, I got to tell you, folks, this has been around since 2001, even before that, but the NSA, the aggressive interstate domestic use of NSA spying has been around since 9/11. That was the impetus for the barn doors opening, and every bit of information from everybody, from your grandma, from your aunt, your gammy, to you and me. Not just the metadata, and that's the lie. See, that's the lie they're pushing. The mainstream media is pushing the lie That, for example, it's just the metadata. It's just the it's the number called and the number, the duration of the call, and just statistical information. Folks, that's the lie that is being pushed by this government. That's the lie that's being parroted by the administration. It's content as well. They want to know what you're talking about, and it's essentially Gestapo tactics. Now, if that word is offensive, sorry, but that's what it is. It's pre-crime thought police in this country. And we tend to think of our judiciary, even our executive branch right now, even most people tend to think of the people occupying those offices as benign. Is that really true? Are they really benign? I'd argue no. But what would happen if you really had a tyrannical dictator in office? I know. I can hear you right now saying, well, wait a minute, don't we? Bush was doing this. Obama is continuing the agenda. It's not going to stop.
And really, he doesn't have a choice. He has to continue the agenda.
Exactly. Because who's behind all of this? Really, Joe and listeners, is it Obama that's really behind it? Was it Bush that's really behind it? Is it the Congress that's really behind it? Is it the FISA court judge that's really behind this? No, I don't think so. I would argue that
much darker forces are behind this, and they have found willing human participants to be the face of the new way they do things. And that way is the way, unfortunately, that we have seen everything eroded, our civil liberties, the freedoms and prosperity that this nation once
But
was known
by the way,
for.
Yeah, and I've got to say this, what disturbed me a lot as well, when I read the 3-page denial, the NSA, the government, is hiding behind Executive Order 13526. You can write that number down, 13526, ladies and gentlemen. Signed by Barack Hussein Obama on December 29th, 2009. That's the executive order that the NSA is hiding behind and saying, yeah, we don't have to tell you anything. Not one doggone thing. You know why? Because it's a matter of national security. Folks, let me tell you something. We are in a tyrannical state here. And that's not hyperbole to say. Every phone call, every email, every piece of snail mail, everything you do is essentially being recorded. And again, it's not just the simple data that's being recorded, it's the content. When it comes to telephone, email, computer work, it's the content. Now, let me ask you a question, Joe. Let's just say you and I are sitting at the dinner table here and talking, just you and me, talking about this. Or talking as investigators. We've seen this before. If you have information, if for example, if we were not principled people, and you've got information about your neighbor, for example, your very rich neighbor, or your neighbor who happens to be the mayor of the town or the police chief of the town, and it's embarrassing information, we'll say, and we weren't principled, couldn't we do things? Oh, I don't know. Blackmail? Yeah, of course. Now apply that to what happened to Justice Roberts, or not what happened to him. Apply that to Justice Roberts' epiphany with respect to the Affordable Health Care Act. Apply that to various things that have happened over the last 10 years. Is it a stretch just to merely ask the question, if perhaps some rogue agency, some rogue government, some out-of-control person, unprincipled person may have had something to do or some things to do with various issues? I think it could very well be. And all of this being hidden behind an executive order signed by Barack Hussein Obama, also known as Barry Soetoro, on December 29th, 2009. Notice that's 2 days before the end of the year, when everyone is preparing to watch the glittery ball drop in the middle of Times Square, and everyone else is preoccupied with holiday festivities, and Congress is out for Christmas break. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen, really. And I'll just say that I believe, and by the way, the Pelican Brief happened to be on cable television this weekend. I think it was yesterday. The reason I mentioned that, I saw it in the TV listings, and it made me think. I don't know, Joe, have you seen the Pelican Brief? Did you ever watch that? Okay, yeah. He shook his head.
It's been a while. It's been a while, but I have seen it.
Julia Roberts and I don't know who else, but where 2 Supreme Court justices were killed. But think about that. Just think about that. Real life art imitating, or real life imitating art, perhaps. Although the justices weren't killed, but they were neutralized, weren't they?
Imitating real life, because we know how things usually go, and we see these movies that come out, and what was the other one? The Manchurian Candidate. Then you have The Siege about martial law. The White House Down was the newest one to come out, I think, that people were talking about.
And ladies and gentlemen, listeners, do you have a problem? I mean, I do. I've got a problem with these movies that are coming out from Hollywood. We know that Hollywood is, they telegraph what the real power brokers, the Illuminati, the Luciferians, intend to do or are doing or whatever. But you've got this whole spate of films, White House Down. What was a couple of other ones of late? Red Dawn, of course. But there was one here just that came out on March 22nd.
We did a show on that, and it started with an O. I can't think of the name. Goodness. Olympus has fallen.
Has fallen. That's right. Olympus has fallen. The symbolism, the occult symbolism in these. When I say occult, I do reference. I take that word occult to mean the Illuminati, the Luciferians, the power brokers, all of these. If you look at all of these together and really study and get into the real deep dark, and I mean some dark issues here, way beyond what normal people think and how normal people think. And I say normal, I'm talking about sane, rational people of reasonable sensibilities. You're talking about how these people think. And think about Olympus has fallen 322. What's the number for Skull and Bones? 322. You know, we can make all of these connections, and some people might chuckle, roll their eyes, and say, yeah, okay, you can make anything into a coincidence, but really you can't. Certain things, I mean, there are coincidences. Not everything is a conspiracy. But on the other hand, there are some conspiracies that are so big, you don't even recognize them. You don't recognize them when you see them because of their large nature. And I just wanted to bring that to people's attention. There are so many things. And Nathan Leal, our guest, talked about it and things like that. And we've had guests in the past, and we're going to have guests in the future that are going to be talking about this. And by the way, Joe, I'm so excited about we've got some exciting guests in the offing. We're not going to mention any names now, but folks, this show is growing, and it's thanks to you, the listeners, the power behind the show that have allowed us or are allowing us to grab some big name, very well-educated, well-informed guests just like Scott Stevens, for example. Very, very, very knowledgeable about what he's going to be talking about tonight. And it's thanks to you, the listener. And I just want to say, give you a heartfelt thank you for that, because it's so important. But moving along, Joe.
Yeah, yesterday we had a plane crash outside of San Francisco International Airport. I'm going to play this 1 minute, 24-second clip from Russia Today on this plane crash, and then I'm going to talk on the other side of this clip on some of the information. Chris and Don, I got your email. I had not had a chance to look into the what you mentioned, but there are some interesting things that surround this, not just this crash alone, but some other things that happened at the same time.
An airliner has crash-landed at San Francisco International Airport. The Asiana Boeing 777 came to rest off the runway and, by all accounts, caught fire while its tail section had broken off. The air company, the airline, says that 291 people were on board, and the latest reports from emergency services say that all the passengers and crew are accounted for. Now, we're bringing live pictures from the scene there at San Francisco Airport. We understand that some witnesses saw passengers escaping down the emergency slides, the emergency inflatable exits, and firefighters are now at the scene damping down the aircraft. And, of course, we'll bring you the latest on this throughout the hour. But just to say that so far the authorities say that all the passengers, which could be up to 300 on board, have been accounted for. But we're still waiting to get confirmation of that. And San Francisco Airport is now closed following this incident, which occurred in the last hour. And as we can see, the emergency crews are on scene and the fire service is damping down this 777 Boeing airliner, which has crash-landed in San Francisco. And, of course, you can follow all the developments on our website as well at the moment, rt.com, where we're getting lots of Twitter feeds and eyewitness accounts. rt.com for more on that, and, of course, follow the developments here on screen here on RT.
Okay, so that was a rundown of what happened. So few people did pass away so far from what I've seen in what appears to be a very nasty crash.
Okay, here's what I have, and then we can go from here. Okay, source with actual people close to the situation. The autopilot information was incorrect. That's number one.
Okay, I have a question,
okay.
And then you might or might not know the answer to this because I'm not sure how in-depth knowledge of flight piloting you have. Autopilot is not for landing, right? It's for when you're cruising.
Right. When you get ready to land, when you make your approach, you disengage the autopilot, and of course you take over manually. But the autopilot information. See, okay, let me just go through this, and then you'll see where this connects. The runway starts about 1,000 feet past the location. That particular location is technically deviant from the normal pattern. They were set for the next runway over. So the problem started well before their actual well before they began to land. They corrected in the worst way. They tried to power up and pulled up the nose manually because they were coming in too fast, too short. The correct response was nose down, or the correct response should have been to put the nose down and retract the spoilers and full power to get air or lift over the wings. And here's the crux of it. They had only seconds to make a decision. And they had a response that actually required 30 seconds minimum to actually perform. So by the time they realized that they had to make a decision, it was only seconds to respond. But the response required 30 seconds minimum. They essentially stalled out, and that would be attributed to pilot error. Now, that's the information I got from my source. Now, that said, could there be any other external factors to that? Well, I don't know, but that, as of Sunday morning, that's what was known or believed to. And again, first reports, they're questionable. Now you notice too, however, and I'll just mention this: if you watched the news reports, they had traffic copters or people in the air looking down at the crash scene, but the debris field was a lot larger or a lot wider than just where they were looking. So now, is it a case, for example, could it be a case where they are pointing the cameras to where they want you to look and away from where they, or is it just, it is what it is, and that's pilot error? Or is it a combination of both? Seriously, we don't know the answer to this, and we're going to be looking into this a little bit more.
I'm going to pull up the email that was sent to me, and like I said, I have not had a chance to go through and find the website or the YouTube channel that was provided. Let me just try and find this here. But what was said was that there was an anomaly in the magnetosphere, and that anomaly.
You know what? I got the same thing too, and that's right. The anomaly could affect the instruments. And
suspicious observer on YouTube. Apparently, somebody who has a YouTube channel and does reports. This was sent to us that apparently did a report on this plane crash. They say that 1 minute before the crash, there was a reverse magnetic event or some kind of magnetic event, and there was another plane that crashed. I think this was in Greece at the same time, around the same time, a small plane. And as I said, that's something that needs to be looked into.
Well, we will.
It's interesting that the way things, it might or might not be anything more to it than what it says.
That's right.
So I'm waiting just for the official report to come out, the response. And you said that pilot error is what they're saying.
Well, yes, and a lot of things can be attributed to pilot error when, everything else has been looked into, and it's easy to blame the pilot, frankly. But, folks, I want to bring your attention to July in general, because July 17th, 1996, folks, do you remember what happened on July 17th, 1996? We're going to be doing a program about this in detail because I think this is extremely important. Why? The Clintons were in power. The very same people who are in power today are still around today. And this is an issue that, to me, is near and dear to my heart, Joe. Any recollections as to what happened on July 17th, 1996? Over Long Island Sound? Well, TWA Flight 800.
And yeah, it's interesting how this information, these plane crashes come out. We just saw recently that there were disclosures about the possible alternative theory of the original explanation, and now they're saying it could have been shot down. The people who said before that it was some weird electronic spark that lit up the fuel tank and it blew it up. And that didn't make much sense. I remember you talked about that a lot, and I didn't really understand all the details, and I just knew the plane crashed. But
I still, by the way, at East Mauritius Beach, looking out. I think it was on the anniversary of that crash when David and I were out there. But one other thing that happened in July, though, we're going to be talking about. July 20th, once again, the Clintons, 3 years prior to TWA Flight 800, July 20th, 1993, in Washington, D.C. Folks, any recollection as to what happened on that day? Joe, any recollection? Well, of course, it was the murder of Vince Foster. the Deputy White House Counsel. Do I believe he committed suicide? Absolutely not. I believe Vince Foster was murdered. And I've talked to people who have the same, shall we say, the same information. Now, what I'm about to tell you, I can't prove it, but I'll say this: the coroner, or the medical examiner who did the autopsy went in early, I think it was an hour, maybe 2 hours earlier than the autopsy was scheduled for, and had made a few incisions on the body. And it's my understanding. And again, I can't prove this. If you ask me who told me this, I can't tell you. If you ask me if I have proof, I'll say no, because I don't. But I've heard it from more than one source that the medical examiner was instructed to remove the tongue of Vince Foster and show it to people. Omerta.
What was the reasoning behind that?
To make sure that no one
He was dead, though, right?
Well, yeah, but to show it to people and say, this is what will happen to you if you decide to talk. And, so if, of course, I visited Fort Marcy Park. The incident happened in 1993. I was there in 1997, in Fort Marcy Park. I've got photographs of where the body was found. I know that Christopher Ruddy, of course, he wrote a book, The Death of Vince Foster, The Strange Death of Vince Foster, which is a great book, by the way. And you talk about gang stalking. There's an issue of gang or stalking in there. But the fact is, both of these things happened in July. Both of these happened during the Clinton administration. And the Clintons are still in power. So where's the relevance here to what's going on? The Clintons are still in power. The very people that are associated with the incidents involving the cover-up of TWA Flight 800, the cover-up of Vince Foster, both that happened this, anniversaries of this month, are in fact related. And we're going to be doing a show. Yeah. So so where's the relevance? That's the relevance, and I do believe personally that had, for example, had the truth been told about TWA Flight 800, things would have turned out a lot different with respect to the FBI's work with the FBI's handling of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, if you will. So keep that in the back of your mind as well. So we are going to try to get people like we're going to get some people here to get into this, to get into these subjects, and to tell us why this is important, and tell us their knowledge of these incidents. So I'm excited for this month. A lot of great guests coming up.
We're going to hit a couple pieces of news here before we go to break and bring on Mr. Scott Stevens. The EPA set to unveil a host of new regulations. The Obama administration is looking forward to a host of new environmental regulations that go far beyond the president's plans to issue new standards for greenhouse gas emissions from the new existing power plants. These new regulations, previewed in the administration's spring regulatory roadmap released this week, cover everything from pollution runoff from military ships to landfill methane emissions. In some cases, will be issued long after called for under the law. This September, the EPA plans to propose rules for greenhouse gas emissions from a new power plant, and next June will issue draft rules for existing facilities. Those dates match up with the timeline President Obama has given for new regulations, which supporters have cheered as a major step in confronting climate change. That's a good sign that the administration is serious about the rules, according to James Goodwin, a policy analysis at the Center for Progressive Reform.
Are we not going to talk about climate change, at least peripherally, with our guest tonight?
I hope we do get into that, and I don't know his views and opinions on that, so I'm looking forward to that, as this climate change is not just man-made environmental destruction. There is a much larger force at work. The sun is expanding, it's getting hotter. You have things being released into the atmosphere that have not been there before. You have the earth cracking underneath our feet as it is expanding, as the crust is expanding. Sinkholes, we talked about those a lot and still do. We have volcanoes erupting. Things are changing at a rapid pace. And let me tell you something. It's not just Earth. It's our whole universe. And it's not man-made climate change. It's God-made warning of the people.
I believe that to be the case. I really do. We're entering a time, folks, that is going to really shake our hearts and our souls and our very core. And I think we have to understand what's taking place. And part of it, I was going to start out with a little bit about what's taking place here in our country and about the economy, especially the economy, and about the Fabian socialists. In fact, perhaps we'll do that tomorrow or later this week, because there is a plot to destroy our Constitution. Of course, we have in the Bill of Rights, and we're seeing it unfold right before our very eyes. But to what end? Really, but to what end? Of course, there's the killing of the dollar, the creation, the manufacturing of a global financial crisis. But why? Well, not since the Tower of Babel have we seen this rush for a new world order. And I had to look this up. By the way, Joe and folks, I about fell off my chair when I heard about this. In fact, let me just do this real quick here. I know that we're short on time, but did you know that? Let me see here. Yeah, of course, when I'm looking for it, I can't find it. But did you know that Mikhail Gorbachev, let me just see if I have this. Okay, here it is, right here. On June 5th, 1990, Mikhail Gorbachev said this, and think about this, ladies and gentlemen. Tolerance is the alpha and omega of the New World Order. Tolerance is the alpha and the omega of the New World Order. Tolerance is everything, the New World Order. And that was back in 1990. And by the way, the quote is from Mikhail Gorbachev. Now, some people think, well, that means something totally different. No. It's interesting. In recent times, former President George Bush Sr. openly spoke of a New World Order. H.G. Wells, of course, the science fiction writer, he wrote a book called The New World Order. Hitler spoke of the New World Order. Woodrow Wilson used the term New World Order, but it was, again, Mikhail Gorbachev on June 5th, 1990, who said, tolerance is the alpha and omega of the New World Order. Now, think about that. Think about the implications of that statement, ladies and gentlemen. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this, the 8th day of July 2013. I'm Doug Hagmann. With me in studio, within reach, within head-slapping reach, is Joe Hagmann, my son. Together, we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. I want to thank you for listening and staying with us. And for the next 2 hours, we're going to have a very special guest, Scott Stevens. His website, weatherwars.info. Weatherwars.info. Get your pens and papers out. Take some notes. Hi folks, Doug Hagmann here. You might know me as the co-host from the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, or as a frequent guest on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. If you're like me, you're tired and confused over today's headlines. You just don't know where to turn for accurate, concise information about really what's going on, what's truly going on in today's society. If you don't know where to turn for accurate, well-researched, and properly vetted news, I've got a suggestion. In fact, it's a requirement. Bookmark Canada Free Press. That's canadafreepress.com on the internet. It's just not for Canada. It's for news across the world. Judy McLeod, founding editor, has put together a vast array of talented writers like Kelly O'Connell, Daniel Greenfield, Dr. Ilana Johnson-Powell, a lot of guest columnists, very talented writers. Folks, that's Canada Free Press at canadafreepress.com. Now mobile friendly. Follow on Facebook, because without America, there is no free world. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say this. The Independence Day special that's up on our website from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, they sold out of that. Thank you, folks, for participating in that. I couldn't believe the deal that they made, but this is a deal unlike any other from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com. You know, every time I think that they're going to do something that would, every time I think that they're done surprising me, up comes another surprise. Because listen to this. They've put together an elite prepper pack. It's the Roll and Go. If you go to AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, if you go to the store link in the upper right-hand corner of the page, and then go to, I think it's the third page, it's the Elite Prepper Pack, Roll and Go. From food to shelter and gas masks to chemical suits as well as defense weapons. 285 items. Now, this is a package that's valued well over $1,800. This is peace of mind in a fantastic survival kit. It goes from a backpack to a rolling duffel bag in 30 seconds, record time. So, like I said yesterday, you know, I could go from an upright standing position to sound asleep in 30 seconds, and of course, this would accommodate me. But the neat thing is this: the items that they've got, 285 items in this backpack. A 3-person tent, air mattress, solar shower. Goodness, do I need one of those now? A hurricane lamp, a 10-person medical kit, which is OSHA approved. Thank goodness. I'm glad OSHA put their stamp of approval on that. A hand crank flashlight, 3 mini flashlights, a shortwave AM/FM receiver radio. This surgical steel multi-tool. I'm not allowed to touch that. No, why is everyone just not letting me touch like sharp objects? I just don't get it. A 48-hour emergency flasher, a safety vest, 20-piece emergency tool set. I could go on. A fleece blanket. I'm allowed that, but what? I can't have a super sharp pocket knife with a clip? All right. Well, look, 2 journals, in case you want to write your thoughts down, 10 ink pens. But more important things, 90 servings of healthy and nutritional, just add water food, 18 pouches. It's just unbelievable what they have put together. Things that you would not ordinarily think about, plus things that you won't find elsewhere. This water bladder thing, which is really cool. Purification tablets, a filtration bottle with a straw, and on and on and on. Almost $2,000 worth of merchandise. Hagmann and Hagmann special. $695. You heard me right, $695. Now look, the spirit moves you. Buy 2 of these massive elite prepper kits. If you do, they'll double your stun guns and pepper spray and include 3 emergency food bars at no extra charge, and all of the orders receive free shipping to all of our 50 states. So you folks in Alaska and Hawaii, don't feel like you're not included, because you are in this case. Well, hopefully at some point, hopefully we won't need those, but I'll tell you what, it's better to have it, not need it, and then not need it when you do, folks. And we want to welcome you back, ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 2 of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this, the 8th day of July 2013. That ringing in the background you hear is our call to our very special guest. See, this is live radio at its finest, isn't it? This is live radio at its finest. I want to introduce our guest today, Mr. Scott Stevens. He's a great man, very intelligent man with respect to all things in terms of meteorology. He was a weatherman, meteorologist by profession. He's an expert on many things, geoengineering. His website, folks, is weatherwars.info. Please write that down. In fact, we're going to have a hard link after the hour or after the show to his website. It's called weatherwars.info. With that, Joe and I would like to welcome Mr. Scott Stevens. Scott, are you there?
I sure am. Glad to be with you this evening, guys.
Hey, glad to have you, man. I'll tell you. Thanks for coming on short notice. Mr. Stevens, I got to tell you something. I'm an investigator.
Tell me away.
I got to say this. I've been an investigator for almost 28 years in the private sector, and I'm a really hard sell. And like I've got a thick skull. And when my son was telling me about chemtrails and about spraying, and even Stan Deo would talk about this, and Steve Quayle and other people, they'd say, hey, we're being inundated by chemtrails. I'm thinking, come on, I just don't believe it.
You're like the serious guys. Get a life.
Yeah, I'm thinking this is all internet urban legend. And then a guy comes along with the street credentials and just blows me out of the water. And, of course, others as well. But you, of course, with the street creds and saying, hey, wait a minute, there's something to this. First of all, welcome to the program. Second of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll go from there.
Well, I'm with you. I was part of that crowd that could not believe that an activity like this was simply happening in the sky. It was another incidence of idiocy on the internet, where people not knowing what they're looking at and subscribing, nefarious activities, to these trails. I'm like, guys, they're just airplanes. Cars leave exhaust too. It's okay. It's not great to leave pollution behind, because of hydrocarbons and so forth, but that's all it is. And that's where I was for quite some time. And I was always in the alternative media. That was, being in mainstream media, how stories are slanted, even at the local level. They try to get both sides, but when you only have 1:10 or 2.5 minutes tops, how can you accurately present both sides of the story? It's virtually impossible. And so from about 1998, which is when I believe I first came across the term chemtrail, and more than likely that was I was on rents.com, just perusing some of their stories. And I see pictures of these MD-80, MD-90s, 2 engines, thin wing on a jet plane, but yet there's this monster, colorful trail behind it. I'm like, okay, that's kind of interesting. You have my attention now. And during that time, I was very keen in alternative energy. It was the late 90s, early 2000, and I just something was just wrong in the world. There's all these free energy devices, and we should be done with oil. For goodness sakes, it's the 21st century, and we're still burning things to get across town. It just seemed, just shy of lunacy to me. And so I'm researching how to build magnetic motors or pull energy from the vacuum with negative switching and circuitry and so forth, and I come across Lieutenant Colonel Bearden's website, Chenier.org, CHENIERE.org. And in that site, there's a page called Energetics, and there was a sidebar, and he had it titled Soviet Weather Engineering. That had my attention, because in the late 90s, the guys in Washington, D.C., at what is now called the Weather Prediction Center, were writing discussions for North America for, what was going to happen weather-wise in the next 5 to 7 days. And these guys they had a miserable record, those during the late 90s. The storms would, you could see them on the models. They're supposed to come ashore. They're supposed to put this much rain down and then track along this path and so forth. But nothing was behaving as modeled. Nothing was behaving as forecast. And so they would close their discussions with a saying similar to, yet again, another low-confidence forecast. And I'm just kind of flabbergasted at why we can't get it right. I mean, seriously, WTF is going on here? And so I keep coming across the chemtrail story, and then on Bearden's site, he's got the Russian story that in 1976, as a result of Cold War competition, the Russians in the 50s and 60s essentially gave up trying to match the Americans bomb for bomb. And what they did was hire or employ or draft thousands of physicists. And Stalin told his scientists, get me something that the Americans don't have. Get me something. And so they were essentially exploiting Tesla's technologies, being able to direct energy or action at a distance. And then this was their energetics program. And it was rolled out in the 60s. Too late for the Bay of Pigs incident, but nevertheless it was rolled out in the 60s. And then from ham radio operators, this chirping started to show up in the 3 to 10 megahertz frequency range on ham radios. And this began early July 1976. And according to Tom Bearden, this was the beginning of full-time weather modification operations over North America. And so we're talking coming up on 40 years ago that these experiments became operational. And that's kind of where I was. And by 2002, I had subscribed to a website so I could get high-resolution satellite imagery, something that was difficult to do on any government site, to find the true high-res raw stuff. And I was, I have an audience that I'm beholden to. They tune into me at 5, 6, and 10 o'clock and relying on me for a forecast. I mean, they have choices. They could watch the other two stations, but they watch me. And so I don't like being wrong. That's just not, it doesn't feel good when you have to get up the next day and apologize for why a storm didn't do what it was forecast to do. And so this became a passion from about 2002 all the way till when I was let go in 2005, is to figure out what was going on in the sky. Was there a way that these chemtrails had anything to do with Bearden's scalar energy weather manipulation that was happening across the country? And that's where my research was going, was how do these two things, scalar weather engineering and chemtrails, match? And they do. They do.
Wow. Well, let me ask you a question, because you mentioned this. You said you were let go in 2005. Is it because of your investigation work into this subject, or is it something different? Or was this? Go ahead.
It was this topic. It was absolutely this topic. I ended up at a station in Pocatello, Idaho, and they were an ABC affiliate that came under new ownership, ended up grabbing the NBC affiliation from what had been the number one station in the market. So we had an affiliate change, new ownership come in, and then they hired me. So within a year, we had taken the station, which had been a distant number 3, to a number 1. And for the following 9 years that I was there, our weather at 6 and 10 o'clock was number 1 in that market. I was worth millions of dollars every year to that sales department. And it was only when the competing ABC station started to talk to the regional ad reps, essentially the Ford dealers in particular, saying, you don't want to advertise on Channel 6 with Scott Stevens because he is talking about such and such. He's talking about these topics. He's out of the normal, and you don't want to spend your money there. And so when it starts to bubble up in the ad department, in the sales force, then corporate got wind of it, and I was their only employee that has ever gotten severance. So they recognize that. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just they. Yeah, go ahead. You got a break?
Yeah. No. I just want to ask you this. I didn't realize you weren't finished with that. I apologize. I'm so interested and excited about this topic because this is something that, it's to really get to really have a reasonable, sensible, a person without hyperbole on to talk about this is a distinct pleasure. I mean, you would make a terrific guest in a court of law, for example, laying out evidence, and of course that's our venue. But the question I had for you is this: we've got listeners all over the world right now, and this affects everybody, doesn't it? I mean, whether you're listening in.
Indeed.
Okay, so wherever you're listening, ladies and gentlemen, Colombia, Rome, the Far East, the Mid East, the UK, this affects you as well.
Even if you don't see the chemtrails, that does not mean that these operations aren't underway. Simply because they don't have clearance to fly those nation skies doesn't mean that they can't see what's going on and impact the weather from space.
Wow.
That's key. That is key.
Okay. Now, what... And folks, by the way, let me just interject. You're listening to Mr. Scott Stevens, the owner of weatherwars.info. That's weatherwars.info, an expert. I'll say an expert on chemtrails and what are they spraying up there and so on. Why don't you go ahead and lead us off with what you think? I mean, give me, and I'm the kind of guy that really is a very simple-minded kind of guy. What are they spraying? Why are they doing this? Who's doing it? What's going on? I mean, give me the skinny on this. Give us the skinny.
Well, I'm going to start with the why, because I'm going to have to go back to kind of where I ended the other last little segment. Because by 2004, daily I was archiving and examining satellite imagery, visible satellite imagery. And when you begin to look at things at 0.5 kilometer to 1 kilometer scale, meaning clouds the size of 0.6 or 6 blocks of a mile can show up as a pixel, you can begin to see the shapes of these storms. When you watch the evening news, you are getting a third grader's representation of what is happening in the weather. Even from a meteorologist that has that bloody AMS and NWA seal, they have dumbed it down to the lowest common denominator. And so you get pretty colors, you get nice animations, but the amount of valuable information they provide is so close to zero it's disturbing. They may get the high and low guesstimate for tomorrow, but you're not going to get much more than that. They're certainly not going to sit down and show you why the weather did what it did today. That's just not what they're interested in. And so I'm examining these satellite pictures, and on June 6th, 2004, I see a square shadow up near Billings, Montana. And I'm like, that's a funky old shadow. And right next to it was the cloud, the square cloud creating that shadow, because it was late in the evening, so the shadows and the texture in the clouds was rather amplified. And what's fascinating is that this was a weak cold front moving through northern Montana in early June. And there was geometry, cutouts, cubes and squares and radial patterns, all on this minor cold front. And at this point in time in my research, my understanding had gotten to the point where, yes, they could manipulate the weather to enhance droughts. Yes, they could manipulate the weather to accentuate hurricanes. But I didn't believe they cared enough to do it day to day and over essentially every square mile of this country. And on that day in June of 4, my worldview changed, because what I saw in that one cold front just sent my stomach sinking, as I had to readjust how I looked at the weather on this planet. And so at that point, I thought, I got to figure this out. I have an audience that relies on me. And of how do these chemtrails fit into this blatant and aggressive and overt and complete weather modification? So I bought cameras. I bought 4 cameras, 2 webcams and 2 mini DV cams, and strung firewire cable around the house. Bought 2 computers and some time-lapse software. So by the end of 2004, I had these cameras up and running. Within 4 months, in April of 5, I caught a series of chemtrail flights over southern Idaho where I was living at the time. 8 flights in 7 minutes. Only one of those planes left a trail that persisted for more than about 5 minutes. Of that one trail that persisted, there was a segment that 2 other flights investigated, and one of them went precisely through the middle of that segment of persisting trail, and the following flight went and hit the very end of it. So I thought, these planes are leaving segments of trails that will fluoresce, that will stay visible, and other planes are coming along at precise angles and hitting them. For some reason, these trails that remain visible are revealing something that the atmosphere is doing. Is it a place where there's a little more moisture? Is it a place where the atmosphere is ascending in vertical ascent, which is very conducive to cloud development? Or is it that they're actually measuring the life force of the atmosphere, the orgone energy, where that energy is and is excited, moisture rapidly collects around? And so and then the other thing that they can do is if we're dealing with HAARP, we're dealing with scalar energies, we're dealing with infrasound, we're dealing with ionization. So we have different tools that these weather makers use. And if you're going to target specific zones and layers of the atmosphere, then you leave a trail. And it says, okay, over here on the west side of me, hit me. Hit me with the HAARP. Hit me with the scalar. Hit me with ionization. Do something, because I have this very straight line, this boundary. And on days where we have trails, not too many in the sky, but a few that are persisting, you can see that they denote, or they are demarcations of zones of energy, where one segment of the sky has one cloud type, one cloud behavior, and on the other side of the trail, the clouds are behaving very differently. And this is what was revealed by the time-lapse photography. And if we had more of these naysayers who say, no, there can't be anything up there, they've got to be just condensation trails, if they would spend a little time doing photography, time-lapse photography in particular, it won't be long, and they'll be in this course as well.
Wow. So, well, you on your website, you've got not only images but video of chemtrails.
Yeah, okay. It's almost all video now. It's just that's the story.
Wow,
that's the story.
Man, and it's very difficult to deny when you look at the video. If you and folks, you've got to look at this with an open mind. You know, and it took me a long time to really understand or to accept that this is taking place.
Me too.
Because it's like what. The who, what, when, where, why, and how, and so. But now there is something I want to bring up, kind of maybe out of order, but I think it's important for people to know right now.
Okay.
There's something going on here. Is there not something taking place right now? Is there not like a breaking story with respect to chemtrails or weather modification, especially in the West? Or is there something? In other words, are we not seeing something, some sort of West Coast spraying situation that's going to be affecting things, drought and such?
There is not a day where there aren't several hundred planes aloft over this country alone. There's not an hour in the day where that isn't the case. So I get emails. I'm like, oh my goodness, they're out at night too. I'm like, well, of course they're out at night. That's half the day essentially. So why would they, just because the sun goes down, go to bed? Why would they turn it off? No, night and over the oceans are the prime times because nobody's watching. And so they go crazy at night and then out over the oceans because there isn't this growing curiosity from below as to what's going on up there. So the nights are big, and over the waters, over the open expanses of the oceans are big. So today, on the 8th of July, what I'm seeing is we've got this tropical storm Chantal, which is now approaching the Bahamas. It's headed into the Caribbean. And on the eastern side of that tropical storm, in the water vapor imagery, lots of trails. Also up to the north, off the coast of Nova Scotia, another zone of intense trailing. Now, there's just so many clouds across the eastern U.S. today, and so much activity that I didn't see any big blatant zones of chemtrailing, although I'm sure that there are scattered locations where that does happen. And then out in the Pacific, there are some big operations. Because what they can do in the Pacific is shape and guide the storms before they come ashore. And this is where most of the engineering happens, is out over the oceans. And this is why the water quality in the watersheds in California and Oregon or Washington and British Columbia, for that matter, is so bad, because it's the first rain from these storms that have been chemtrailed to hit the continent. And so they're getting all that pollution.
But these are the big operations that you're talking about in the Pacific.
Yeah.
These are in relation to the Fukushima radiation release.
No, Fukushima, I believe, is wholly independent. The chemtrails are dealing with weather and shaping the jet stream and whatever else, what other sub-agendas may be ongoing. But Fukushima is, there's radiation all over the atmosphere. It's circled the globe I don't know how many times, but it's gone around and we're all breathing it. That's just the way it is. That's just the way this planet is right now. So, and I trust that we'll get into a detox topic here before we finish the show, how to deal with toxicities.
Yeah, I think so, especially detoxing from whatever they're spraying. So, Scott, I mean, okay, so you're telling us that this program began in the 60s. Is that about right, roughly?
I would say the 60s. I mean, I've got pictures where some of the old timers. I got a shot from 1953 and 1957 with a dude in the Adirondacks. Some extrachrome slides of contrails that he said had me so startled when I first saw them on this Saturday morning in 1953 that I went in and got my camera and started taking pictures. And then another episode of that in 57 that he has pictures of. And so I think there was some early experimentation with obscuring visibility of battlefields, of cities. How can we create this screen, this shield, so we can have we don't have U-2 spy planes or blackbirds, spying. So they were thinking how they could cloak bases, and then it turned into something else. Else.
And that's something else, I guess, is what I'm curious about. But even before that, let me just ask a really kind of a question that I even ask myself. Okay, we're all out. I mean, normally people are out during the day, and they're doing their various things. Look up in the sky. You see these trails. I would, again, 2 years ago, I'd say, well, they're contrails or whatever. Why are we not questioning? Why is no one questioning? Or why are too few questioning what in the world we're seeing? I know that sounds like a very sophomoric academic question, but to me,
it's relevant.
Okay,
it's relevant.
I mean,
it's relevant.
What is it?
Because that answer, is relevant to so many other questions as to why the society and our government is the way it is today. And what it seems like is that human beings and Americans have abdicated their responsibility to their government. They've just let go. They don't feel responsible. They don't feel like they can have an impact. They feel like they, can elect a congressman, they can elect a senator, but then that's the last they hear and see from them. And so our hold on our government seems to be lost. And the responsibility of our elected representatives to us is no longer being pressed. We're not demanding responsibility from our elected officials. We're giving them a free ride. And why don't they notice?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Why? No,
Why?
well, I mean, like guys like you and pilots and people that know like how things should be in the sky. Should why aren't they saying, "Wait a minute, that doesn't look right. That's not right."
Yeah.
Why aren't we having more people like this coming forward?
I think there's probably 4, 5, 6, 7% somewhere in there in this country that are aware of it. I think that's about where the numbers are. Otherwise, it's a function of people not knowing that what they see in the sky isn't right. And because we're 30 plus, 40 years into this program, the analogy would be the frog in the escalating pot of water, where it gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and they're not recognizing that things have changed. Things aren't the way they used to be. Because in 40 years, I mean, when Bearden gave us the date of July 4, 1976, when this started, I was 10 years old. And so my recollection of weather prior to this happening pretty much doesn't exist. And my state is probably very, very similar to half the population of this country. We just don't remember what it was like before this. And so
that's very true.
Yeah. And so these guys are ego-laden. They've gotten away from it this long. They have technology that would fascinate us, and we would find just simply unbelievable what they can do with it. And so they think there's no reason to stop.
This technology that you're talking about, that do you have some examples of that?
Well, I think to run the whole operation, we're dealing with a computing power that makes Intel look like play school toys. Intel and the computers that we have as laptops and iPods and iPads and so forth. I think they're dealing with a technology that they have traded for, traded genetic material of the human race for technology, and this goes back 60 years. And so when they see this technology, when they see technology, then they begin to fascinate. They begin to fantasize about how they can use it. They had just finished World War II and Korea, and weather was such a big deal. It determined D-Day. It determined the Battle of the Bulge. It determined whether the Nazis got to Moscow or Leningrad, Stalingrad at the time. Weather is huge when it comes to war making. And that's something this country is very good at, is war making. And so they, as soon as I believe it was 1953 and 1954, there was a presidential department of weather control that reported to the president. It's been around that long. So part of this,
so part of this, aside from what you just mentioned, we're also looking too, because earlier the first hour I had talked about a section of Dr. Nick Begich's book, Mind+Control. Part of this is nanotechnology, chemical spraying, nanotechnology. So we're dealing with multiple agendas, are we not? I mean,
I believe so.
Wow. Okay.
I believe so.
All right.
And I think that there's something that this planet is facing. Either it's a time nexus, it's a dimensional something. There's something happening, something that they're not willing to talk to us about, something that they being the powers that be, don't want to tell us that there's intelligence off this planet. They're keeping us quarantined for some reason, and keeping us quarantined keeps us with low information or low quality information about the true state of this planet and what else may be going on in the solar system and galaxy. Information that if Roswell had happened and ETs were fully acknowledged by the early 50s as Eisenhower wanted, we might be in a whole different world, different energy. We'd go to Mars for lunch. We'd be in a different world. So we've been kept down. We've been away from this information, from this knowledge, from our true planetary history and the history of humankind. That has been kept from us for a reason. And it's so, I believe it's so we're not brave enough, courageous enough to declare our own sovereignty from government. Because if we knew who we were, if we knew what kind of a powerful being we as humans are. They couldn't keep us suppressed. They couldn't keep us quarantined. They couldn't keep us paying their taxes. They couldn't keep this game going. And so whether it's the chemtrails, the nanoparticles, the toxicity of water, soil, food, our bodies, and the bees dying, I mean, it's like this whole ecosystem collapse is their plan. It's their goal. And managing the weather.
Okay, go on.
And managing the weather is just one part of that game. Because if you can rapidly oscillate this biosystem between hot and cold, flood and drought, we're not going to prosper. We're not going to thrive. And I believe that is the goal.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, population control, ultimately population control, right?
Not yet. Not yet. Population control for them has been overpopulation. That way you stress the system. That way you overfish the oceans, and you ultimately break the food chain at a global scale. And that is why the the agenda of overpopulation has been allowed to go on. Because this planet can support 7 billion people. This planet can support 14 billion people, but it cannot do it the American way. It can't do it.
Okay. You said something interesting about the spraying possibly being done for reasons of something not of this earth. I do understand what you mean.
Yeah.
I don't know how comfortable and far you want to go into this topic. Would it be
a
deterrent?
I can go to the end.
Is it would you say it would be a deterrent, or is it helpful for whatever might be coming?
I don't think it's helpful to humankind.
Right.
I think it is helpful to the controllers. And I think it comes down to food security. I think that is the big thing we're going to be dealing with is food security. And at the pace that this stuff is falling out of the sky, soil pHs are changing, and the extent of the fracking that's happening in this country, I would not be surprised, if that in 20 years or 2 decades, that half the farms in this country are non-productive. They're toxic. And so we go through this huge surge of population only to come up against this very hard wall where the soils are finally said, I cannot take another application of Roundup. I can't do it. And they collapse. There's no life left in the soils. There's no life left in the streams because the fracking stuff starts to come up. And the forest soils pH have gone from 5.4 to 6.5. The old trees are still there. They're not healthy, but no saplings will sprout. There's no snails in the soil. The earthworms are gone. The small streams don't have fish in them. The water will not support life. That is where we're headed at this pace. And it is a full spectrum domination. And the chemtrail is a way to get this toxicity globally.
Honeybees. We've noticed a huge decrease in honeybees. It's been reported for a few years now, and I think Albert Einstein was the one that said if the honeybees disappear, humanity would have 3 years left to possibly because of the food and the pollination that purposes they serve. Do these spraying of the chemtrails and the chemicals involved in their being sprayed, in your research, have a direct effect on the bee population?
Well, I don't know how it could help. I don't see it as something that would help sustain the honeybee population. It just can't. It can't. Because if the rest of the smaller plants and the flowers and things are not thriving, then the bees will not thrive either. They just won't. And Einstein's right. He's right. And so then we find Monsanto and some of these other biotech companies trying to engineer the bees, trying to engineer an aluminum-resistant bee or go fully mechanical. So these mechanical bees, these very small things, can go out and populate the GMO crops. That's truly pushing the transhuman agenda. But
wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Holy cow. Well, let me ask you this then. Yeah, if I'm hearing this correctly, what you're saying is there are a number of reasons why this is taking place, one of which could very well be our government is doing this for a purpose that they don't want to tell us why they're doing this, or they don't want to even acknowledge they're doing this because maybe we couldn't handle it or there's some other reason. I mean, is that what I mean? In other words, the chemical spraying. Okay, I can go like 1,000 different directions here, I suppose.
Can't we though?
You know, is this, for example, is this to keep our planet? Is there like a really a real issue with global warming or global cooling, or is this something totally different? Are they spraying because perhaps because we're in a full scale war with other countries, and this has some sort of effect on keeping our areas safe? I mean, is it benevolent or malevolent, or is it both? What's going on here?
If it was benevolent, they would be touting that they're doing it. They would be bragging about it. They would, it would be, support the troops, support the air warriors, support the environment. They would be upfront about it. It may be bigger than they would acknowledge, or smaller than they would want to claim, but nevertheless they would acknowledge that it's happening, and they're not. That isn't happening. So there's something nefarious to it. Because we know how politicians like to talk. They like to brag. They want to get bloody reelected, and so they will ensure that yes, we're doing the right thing with all your tax dollars. We're helping with global warming. We're setting up a little sunshade so we can reflect some of this energy back up to space. The problem with that story is that the guys in Boulder, the National Centers for Atmospheric Research, NCAR, have noticed that the planet began cooling, or let's just say the heat peaked in 1997. So since then, globally, there has been this steady decline in temperature. And this all goes back to the sun. The sun is the power supply, the power source, the energy that drives this solar system. And so if we're seeing a change in ratio of cloud cover, high cloud cover versus, say, cirrus clouds versus cumulus, which is the low puffy clouds, versus the high thin mare's tail type clouds that contrails and chemtrails really love to accentuate, that ratio has changed in 30 years. The ratio of high cloud to low cloud, there's double the high clouds today versus what we saw in 1970. So that alone is going to change the energy budget of this planet. So, if it was for our good, it would be all about, they'd be all about it and telling us.
The low clouds you speak of, the atmosphere seems to be going through changes. Clouds seem to be lower than they used to be. I saw something very interesting yesterday where I saw a layer of clouds moving eastward and a lower layer moving in the opposite direction toward the west. Have you seen that before? Do you know what what's the cause of that? Because I know how the atmosphere has different layers and they can move differently, but they looked really close, too close to be moving in different directions. Yep.
They do, and this is one of the things that the time-lapse imagery, revealed to me, was that clouds today are not always moving with the wind. They're attached to something else. And so I have seen clouds, literally one cloud move intact through another cloud, and they both emerge, essentially unscathed after their mating, if you will. They move through. One cloud will move through another, up and down and sideways, and they maintain their identity. That's wrong. But they're doing it. So this is where the technology comes in, and it appears to me that we're dealing with waves that are just coursing across this planet. And as these waves crest and then ebb and flow, then the clouds are riding or being created by the top or the crest of this wave. And so at 90 degrees, and how many chemtrails have we seen cross precisely at 90 degrees? The vast majority of them. And so what happens when you run your two hands together, crossing at 90 degrees?
Well,
if you do that hard, you get friction. And then you also get dirt coming up on your hand. You see that dirt coming out of your palm prints, little rolls. And on satellite imagery, we'll see those little rolls in the form of clouds. And in meteorology terminology, they're called cloud streets. And I'm like, okay, so are cloud streets actually natural? And they don't know, because they kind of showed up in the 60s. So there's even, if you want to go way down the rabbit hole, what happens if this weather modification technology is not an invention of the 50s and 60s? What if it's older than that? What if it was here 10,000 years ago? What if it was here 30,000 years ago?
And this is a rabbit trail I seriously would like to go down, because, I agree. I mean, we're looking at the potential, are we not, for maybe even an alien agenda? Oh, and sorry for using the alien word, but or even a Atlantean type of Atlantean type of technology.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. Okay.
Because when we look at the first satellite pictures, the first weather satellites took in the early 60s, what they revealed, we still see today. But the scale that they're showing was much larger. Now it's kind of gotten finer. Like the amplitude or the intensity on this system has been turned up a little bit. But there are still some freaky anomalies that these early satellite scientists, weather scientists, perusing the first pictures from space and clouds and pictures, were fascinated and just blown away by the details and oddities that they were seeing. Weather didn't fit the clouds did not look like they expected them to look like. And so when you have NASA naming its solar wind project Enlil, E-N-L-I-L, and then go Wikipedia that name, see what happens. He is, in Anunnaki form, the Lord of the Wind, Lord of the Weather. And so, I'm tending to think that this knowledge has been here a long time. And it's just that our military has gotten to the stage to where they can play with it themselves. And I don't necessarily believe it's our government. I believe there is an aspect of our military which is largely independent from our government. And this is what Eisenhower was so concerned about in that final speech when he warned of the military-industrial complex, when he was so close to having to bring in the First Army from Colorado to go take over Area 51, get it back under American government control. This has gone on a long, long time. And so these guys have had technologies that they've been able to play with. They have an off-world Navy. Weather control is just small beans to them. Small beans.
That's really interesting. But I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's not out of we logically. Again, if we were in a courtroom setting, you certainly couldn't take that off the table. I mean, we have to look at all possibilities.
We have to.
Wow.
Because as soon as we quit looking at things, we quit discovering, we quit exploring, we quit learning. There can't be anything that isn't on the table. Otherwise, we take that potential learning, that potential experience, our potential to grow away from us. And that is certainly not what we need at this point in the game. We are an amazing people. We are an amazing people with incredible potential. And I believe it's just time for us to be set free. It's time.
Well, it's past time. And I was just reminded, as a matter of fact, by email, and I want to thank this gentleman for sending me this reminder. Remember that the Russians, by the way, I mean, talking about how far back this goes, and some of the uses and some of the different technology, I suppose we're speaking about technology now. The Russians were deflecting the jet stream when we, back in the 80s, when we started SDI. So it was kind of like a use of a weapon, if you will. So there are many uses. Let me ask you a question, kind of off script here, because this is something that with my contact I was talking about one time.
Those are my favorite questions.
As bizarre as this might sound, could the spraying, and we're going to get into what they're spraying, if you don't mind, but could the spraying act as a catalyst, for example, for something else? For example, and this is kind of going, you talk about another rabbit trail, but remember the Phoenix Lights back in the 90s? Okay, there was that.
March of 97.
Okay. All right. Could the spraying of whatever they're spraying between, we'll say, the chemtrails and HAARP or whatever, could it act as like an agent for the change in the atmosphere, or the change in, or a catalyst for some type of craft? We'll say it could be military. Who knows? It doesn't matter.
We're speculating.
Yeah, exactly. But the movement of some kind of craft based on whatever is kind of hanging up there, could that be a reason, perhaps?
I suppose it could be. Those craft that are up there, and in particular the triangles, the very large Lockheed Martin triangles that are, about a mile in size and kind of dimensional ships, anti-gravity and so forth. The more I have gotten into this, the more I'm tending to consider that they are the aircraft carriers for this fleet. So that we can keep these planes from, once they're manufactured and set up, they don't have to touch ground again. They don't have to land anywhere. They can all be serviced and done aloft. Hundreds and hundreds of them. So you don't have to intermix these planes in the civilian fleet. You don't have to deal with them, pulling up at a terminal. And, okay, there's no passengers, but what do we do with it? We just load it up and send it back out again. You don't want to run these planes into the civilian fleet. You don't. Just too many questions.
Well, that brings me to another question. And again, folks, I mean, these are unscripted questions. And in a conversation like this, it just happens. But are passenger aircraft causing or spreading any of these chemtrails that we're seeing? In other words, could it be something added to the fuel or something attached to the plane or something? Are passenger aircraft in any way involved in this?
I would say probably. I don't have any evidence to say that they are.
Okay.
But I would say probably. And because I see different behaviors. There are two different kinds of planes doing two different things. The regular commercial fleet with passengers, with freight on board, they have landing slots. They, one takes off in D.C., it has to be at Houston at a certain time it has a 90-second window that it needs to be on the runway so it can be at its gate. So this plane carrying passengers from D.C. to Houston can't be wandering around and investigating debris from other chemtrails. Doesn't have the time. So I tend to think that those planes, if they do anything at all, they leave short trails or no trails at all, but that they would contribute to the particulate count that is up there, or an aspect of the particulate count that needs to be maintained above a certain level. And because that is a scheduled flight from, say, D.C. to IED or Houston, that the airline, let's just say it's Delta, knows that the plane is a 757. It has 120 passengers scheduled. It has capacity for, say, 175. So there's 10,000, 15,000 pounds of available cargo. Does a pallet then show up that gets loaded that weighs 20,000 pounds upon take off, and then when they land, it weighs 4,000 pounds. That's a possibility. But then, all it needs is to unload once it gets to flight level, and then turn off when it lands. But the planes that are the chemtrail planes that I see are too slow, flying too low, and they're too interested in the other planes' trails to have passengers or freight on board. Unless it's a UPS or FedEx or DHL flight that can do a little wandering around. Because I've seen a UPS DC-10 literally do zigzags across the sky. Just boom, 90 degrees turn, 90 degree turn, 90 degree turn, 90 degree turn. He was doing zigzags. And that was an October video that's up on my site, probably on page 6. It's called the UPS zigzag. And so these chemtrail planes are painted up to look like commercial flights. Because if we were to have unmarked gray planes that were not of commercial variety, the Boeing, Airbus, and so forth, we're like, oh man, those are war planes up there. What's going on? What's this assault? What's happening? Who is that? So to hide it, it had to be commercial planes. And to truly hide it, it has to look like an orange Southwest jet, or a Spirit Air, or a British Airways, or a Qantas flight. They all do it. All of their paint schemes, their livery as they're called, have been used in this program. So when you get on your...
I'm sorry, but wouldn't like the air traffic controller sitting there watching the radar or whatever, wouldn't there be questions about that? I mean,
yes and no. Do you know how a transponder works on an aircraft?
No.
Okay.
Except that it should work, right? I mean,
do you remember the Reagans firing in the PACO strike, 1980?
Yes.
Let go the whole contingent of air traffic controllers. This is when the program was getting going. And they wanted, the system needed to be upgraded. When the radar sweeps the sky, they need that radar to know what the planes are. So what happens is they're not really using radar. They're using a beam that goes out and queries the aircraft as to where it is, who it is, and where it's going, and speed and so forth. So then the plane returns that data. The radar doesn't, create the data on its own. The plane returns the data. So if the plane does not have a transponder that is communicating with air traffic control, it's not there. It's just not there. And this is why they are loath to update the air traffic control system in this country, because to do so is going to let them see everything that's happening. So we're not going to get an updated air traffic control system in this country until this program ends or it's public. It isn't going to happen.
Wow. Scott, we're up against the break.
Okay.
We're gonna take a quick minute break. We're gonna come back on the other side and get into this more deeply, and this is very interesting stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this Monday, July 8th, 2013, with our special guest, Scott Stevens. Check out his website, weatherwars.info. He also has a YouTube channel. I'll get that on the other side, and you can check out his work and his videos that he makes. Subscribe to that YouTube channel to stay updated on what he has been putting out there. We'll be right back after these short messages. Stay with us.
Monday edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. It is a live broadcast. Today is the 8th day of July 2013. I'm Doug Hagmann. In studio with me is my co-host, my son, Joe Hagmann. Together we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, career investigators by profession, talk show hosts. Oh, we say we are, but are we? Of course we are. And our very special guest today during these 2 hours is Mr. Scott Stevens of weatherwars.info. Folks, you've got to bookmark this site. You've got to visit the site, weatherwars.info. The key word there is info, because when you go there, you're going to get the information that you really may or may not want to know. I've got to tell you, folks, 2 years ago, seriously, you think I'd be talking about this 2 years ago? I'd be chuckling, laughing, and saying, "Come on, nudge, nudge, wink, wink." I lost my marbles. But I've got to tell you, the more I get into this, and I had one of the books that really got me interested in this is Steve Quayle's Weather Wars and Unnatural Disasters. He wrote this book. In fact, it was published last year, 2012. And you talk about information. It's got patents in there for various apparatuses for ionizing different things and all kinds of things. If you really want to get an eye-opening book, that's Weather Wars and Unnatural Disasters by Stephen Quayle. I highly recommend that book. I know that's in and out of stock, and it's a hard book for him to keep in stock. But that said, our very special guest, once again, Mr. Scott Stevens, his website, weatherwars.info. We are so privileged to have him on, and this is a man who, by profession, a meteorologist who knows clouds, who knows what should be in the sky, and most assuredly, what shouldn't be in the sky.
Yeah, Mr. Stevens, it was a great first hour we had. A lot of good information. I wanted to open the second hour just by asking, from what you've seen, stories you've heard, people's testimonies, and your own research, what consists of these chemtrails? What ingredients are they spraying in these chemtrails?
Well, it appears to be, and this is only because of samples that have been collected, either air samples or collection of water samples. And the vast majority of these samples, and the ones that I've seen now, we're talking 5-6 dozen of them, from all over the country and Canada, and some even into Europe. Barium is always at the top of the list. Barium, aluminum, and strontium, 3 elements. What is most telling is when I get emails that include people's hair analysis. That is the key one for me. Whether you're scooping up soil or scooping up water or snow, it's so easy for the debunkers to say, we've got some environmental contamination. But when we go and we cut off a little bit of hair from you and me and so forth, and the crazy thing is your insurance company will pay for this. So go to your doctor and have a toxicity test, a heavy metals test. They'll cut a clip of hair, maybe a gram, and set it off. And in 3 weeks, you'll know where you are on the scale. You'll know if with your breathing you are pulling this stuff in, with your water you drink, whether this stuff is accumulating in your cells. But those 3 ingredients seem to be at the top of the list. There are probably others, and when I observe the trails in the sky, they are not the same color. Some are orange, some are orange to pink, some are whitish, some are blue-white. So we have at least 4 different color families that tell us that, yes, there's different mixtures, there's a different chemical makeup for these trails. So when we talk about clouds moving through one another, one of these colors may be associated with, say, a north-south moving wave, and then, say, a blue trail with an east-west moving wave. And so you can have 2 different layers of clouds moving in 90-degree angles to each other or directly opposed. That happens. And you're going to need these trails up there to align which direction the clouds move. And that is one of the things when you have these long straight lines in the sky, then they can pulse, and out come the waves, and that's the direction that they move. These chemtrails will hit the tops of thunderstorms in the direction that they're moving, and then all of a sudden there's a cross on top. And then the second plane comes through and is going at 90 degrees opposite to that. Then momentarily, like within 5-6 minutes on the time-lapse imagery, you'll see the top of that thunderstorm, boom, begin to move in that new direction. So where these planes are is where the manipulation of the atmosphere is happening, and that is happening in real time.
These different metals that are being released, do we know effects that they have on people? The side effects that people are whether it's
the heavy metal toxicity,
diseases. What are we seeing as a result of this?
The big one is aluminum. And we are, or were, the richest nation on earth with an incredible healthcare system, great food infrastructure. Not everybody, but almost everybody had clean water and sewer available. So we should have these incredibly long life spans, life expectancies, and a low disease rate and a low cost of healthcare. But that's not what we have. For 40 years we've been slowly poisoned. My grandmother died of Alzheimer's in 2003. She also liked her diet sodas. So if they can't get you with aluminum from the sky, they can get you with aspartame. If they can't get you with aspartame, then they'll get you with GMO wheat or corn. And it is one agenda after another. And it is difficult for us as individual human beings to walk through this gauntlet without getting some of this stuff on you. So, aluminum is the big one, and it goes directly to the brain and the nervous system as it shuts down, as the gaps, the synapses quit firing because they can't reach across that gap. There's too much stuff in between, so the signaling doesn't happen. You can't get the brain to communicate with the toes or with a tumor that's begun to grow. The tumor can't communicate back up. Those cells can't return the communication to say, hey, don't support me, turn me off, signal me to shut down so I can shut down. But we've lost that ability to communicate through the body. And there's two solutions to that. Two solutions. One of the big ones is just coming online in Washington and Colorado. And that is cannabis. Cannabis oil allows the body to communicate through the cannabinoid receptors both ways. So if you want to shut down tumors, if you want to shut down cancers, if you want to stop them from growing, or if you simply want to create the correct ratios of stem cells so your body can repair themselves correctly, you need cannabis oil. The other thing are monatomic elements. These monatomic elements can be found in aloe vera. Monatomic elements found in apricots. They can be found in something called ormus when they're concentrated from sea salt. These elements come in and they greatly assist the body in its ability to clone new cells correctly. So you don't see the disease progressing as quickly or as rapidly, or in many, many cases, it simply shuts down. It's there, but it's non-progressing, and that's because of monatomics. You've got to go to something smaller than the toxins that you're trying to rid the body of. We go to monatomics.
Well, wait, you passed over the cannabis issue a little bit too quickly.
We can go right. The two together are phenomenal in what the body needs.
Having come of age in the early 70s,
life is good.
What I remember the 70s, but no. In all seriousness, you've got when you say cannabis oil, to fight this. You mentioned Alzheimer's. Let me just stop you right there. And people know, our regular listeners know about our fight with Alzheimer's. I've got a family member with Alzheimer's. In fact, it's a horrific disease. The aluminum it's interesting because, well, my father-in-law, who appears to, he's not been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but he had worked with metals, including but not limited to aluminum, for a long period, and his exposure to that metal was significant, by the way. But cannabis oil, is that something that, and the other remedy you mentioned, I mean, is this preventative, reversible, or something to reverse it, or something to prevent it, or both, or what are we talking
All of the above. All of the above.
Wow.
Because it is, our bodies are an accumulation of our life experience. Every place we've been, every meal we've eaten, there's some residue in there. The body has a tough time wasting out things that, number one, it can't get a hold of if it's too small to deal with the liver, kidneys, and to flush out. And the other thing is, so many people don't have fresh water. We've got city water, but it's not clean. It's not fresh.
Well,
it's wet, and you can see through it, but it's got fluoride and chlorine in it, plus whatever else. And so these, we're trying to clean the body with city water. We're trying to get the kidneys to take the toxins out, but yet we're drinking water that isn't clean. So it's almost an impossible task to keep the body's toxin levels low. And this is where these two ingredients, ormus and the cannabis oil, just work so well together, and keeping the regeneration side active all the way through the end of life. The regeneration, so your skin's in good shape, your organs are healthy, your lungs have great capacity, that your liver works to clean out the blood. And these two, because as adult men, we have about 100 trillion cells. And you and I both woke up this morning needing to replace about 300 billion of them. And that all starts in the bone.
Tired.
Yeah,
no
exactly.
Wonder
It's
tired.
work. It's work.
Holy cow. It sounds to us, Scott, like this is a full frontal assault on our immune system. Is it not?
It is. It is.
Mm-hmm.
And, so then we have these random diseases that show up, like HIV, like ADD, like Alzheimer's. All these things that were on the back burner or simply did not exist 100 years ago. And it's environmental. So these diseases show up. We're living in this dirty environment. As clean as it looks outside, it's not that clean. And our bodies are having to contend with this with every breath, with every forkful of food that comes into our systems. Our body has to process the food plus the toxins. And so it's just work. And if you're in a location where you can get those things, you will see a change in the quality of your health, of how you react to things in the world, how these things impact you or then don't impact you. And it's just, I think, because that is as a big a part of this discussion as anything is how to stay healthy, because that ultimately is their goal. What will bankrupt this nation is the healthcare system. The healthcare system that treats but doesn't cure. And this is a discussion that I was so annoyed at during the presidential debate last fall. Romney and Obama both up there, we're going to cut money from Medicare, and, you can't cut money from Medicare. And none of them said, let's cure cancer. Let's deal with diabetes. Let's deal with these things that are costing us hundreds of billions of dollars every year. But they would just as soon keep taxing us. Money goes to the government, money goes to the doctor, money goes to the pharmaceuticals. It's this continually extraction of wealth from the middle class, from all of the classes, back into the elite. So we need
the Cloward Piven strategy from the air, I suppose. I mean, from when I say from above. Yeah. Wow. Yep. Okay. So all of this stuff is kind of tied together. In other words, we might be talking, for example, about toxicity from the chemtrails, but we're also talking about weather modification. We're also talking about weather wars. We're also talking about everything. We are looking at a TV screen, and the old TV screens with the cathode ray tubes, the CRTs, painted pictures. I guess the new ones do as well. They paint pictures on a screen, little dots. At a little dot, this little dot is called chemtrails, is called weather modification, and it is truly just one dot on this matrix of an image that this illusion that we call reality. It is just one part of it, but yet it's so connected to everything. And for 10 years, I have talked about this, hoping that someday we'll get through this, that it'll be acknowledged, that these chemtrails will be a way to pry the door open to the awareness of the American and the world population. Because if we can get them hook, line, and sinker on this issue that they can see, then we can begin to address these other topics. Because then if they realize that, oh my goodness, you mean the weather's really controlled? They can
do that. And once that awakening hits them, they're open to so many more things. And that's
that's the key. Now, Scott, let me ask you a very important question here. We'll just say that I've got on my computer your website up, and of course, folks, for those just joining us, we are talking with Mr. Scott Stevens. His website, weatherwars.info. But let's just say I've got your website up on my computer, and I walk over to my neighbor, knock on his door, and I say, "Hey, buddy, come with me. I want to show you something." And I point up to the sky and say, "I want you to look up there and tell me what you see." And he'll say, "Oh, I see clouds or the exhaust from planes or whatever." And I say, "No, that's not what you're seeing. You're seeing something, something other than that. Tell me, before I walk him in and sit him down at my computer, duct tape him to the chair, and make him go through your website. How do you convince people that, or don't you convince, or is it? I mean, is there I don't want to say a magical formula, but is there a way to grab somebody by the arm and say, "I want you to look up at the sky, and I want you to take a look at what's up there, and I want you, and I'm going to tell you that's not normal, and then I mean, is there something something that we could do to convince people or to show people just from observing the sky today, tomorrow, the next day?"
That's a tough one for me, because I've kind of taken the point that I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. I'm here to spark their curiosity to go look. And I had read many pages, looked at websites, looked at pictures, but what convinced me, what converted me to a believer or a knower, was seeing it happen. It was an August afternoon in 2004. I was in Pocatello, Idaho. It was a clear day, maybe 85 degrees. Humidity was sub 20%. It was just one of those days where you've got 100 miles visibility in the Northern Rockies. And I hear a plane. I'm already outside on the front porch talking to the neighbor, and I see this lime green 747. He's low, and he's leaving a trail like one I have never seen before. And he's flying diagonally from northwest to south, from northeast to southwest. And that trail ultimately arced across the entire sky. And I said, that's a chemtrail. That is one of them. And so I had educated myself. I had gone through this couldn't happen to this might be happening, but I don't know for sure if what I'm seeing is a chemtrail, until that day when the weather conditions were absolutely not supportive of a development of a trail that would persist like that. Couldn't happen. Wouldn't happen. The other thing is that plane was 2 miles too low, and it was out of place. So the fact that it was too low, too slow, and leaving a trail that went from horizon to horizon, I became a believer. And my question then was, okay, how does it play into the weather control? How does it play into that geoengineering mix? And that took the time-lapse cameras to figure out. So
interesting. We
talked to the people. We talked to them sanely, intelligently, without the hyperbole, without the, oh, my God, you're all going to die tomorrow afternoon because of it, because that doesn't work. It didn't work for me. In fact, it pissed me off. Because if they wanted to kill us, there's flus for that. There's bugs for that. Instead of shooting people in Aurora, Colorado, they just open a vial of a virus and leave it be. And then you have 200 people leaving a theater infected. And then it's done. So if you want it, this is not about killing people that way. It's just not. And that kept me out of this whole chemtrail saga for probably 3 years, because the energy that the people were putting out about this as being an apocalyptic event just didn't match with what was happening in the skies and with the trails. And so I don't have time for this. These are just a bunch of freaks.
Gotcha. Yeah. Now, well, okay, let me go in a different direction here, too. Mind control. Mind control. Could we be talking about... Oh, okay.
We have TV for that.
Well,
you know.
Sorry for laughing.
Seriously, you know, let them program themselves. You know, just don't give them any choices. Give them 500 channels of crap, and they'll program themselves. And then you give them bad food, and then you slowly eat away at their ability to process information in their neurons in their heads. Their brains turn to jelly. And then there's the zombies. Now, I don't know why this zombie thing keeps coming up, but it may be that there is something in the trails that is a binary or trinary weapon, meaning that when 2 or 3 other conditions are met, that there is something in the trails that becomes active. It is the icing on the cake. And then this binary weapon, when the parts are brought together, becomes active. I don't know whether that is an energy from the sun, whether it's something from Gwen or cell phone towers. Something could turn on these nanoparticles. Something that we're all carrying.
Yeah. Well, Joe and I were talking about this as well, about, you know, could, like, for example, cell phone towers play into this, as well as HARP and other things. Could all of this be working together, you know, all these different systems working at the same time, complementing one another in such a way to increase or to affect the potency of whatever, or, you know, whatever they might be doing. And I guess, how would you answer that? Perhaps. I mean,
I would say that's a definite maybe. You know, it's there are potentials. Definite maybe. But you know, when this is 40-year-old program, you know, there is some agenda. There is a way out. There is an end game to it. I know it. You don't start something without figuring out how you're going to get out of it, unless maybe you're the Federal Reserve. But
thanks for that, by the way. How true is that?
It's so true. It's so true. They're such idiots. But you know, there's an end game, and I really think it is the ultimate breakdown of this planetary society, that they will run this till the end. And whether that end comes from, you know, an EMP pulse from the sun, whether it's from, you know, California going off the ocean, who knows? Who knows? And even then, are those artificially created geoengineered events? You know, the list is long from what they've done right now. The list is very long. And so that would be a way that they can get the Fed out of the pickle they're in, deal with an economy that is not going to heal until we go through some major catastrophe and we get manufacturing back in this country. You know, something's got to change, and it isn't going to be small. It's got to be monumental, a generational kind of thing to have this end.
Wow. And so it could very well be that this is, well, obviously this has been in the works for decades, but it could very well be that there is an end game to this, and who knows? I mean, you know, could it be tied to the end of the Fed? Could it be tied to whatever? I mean, it's. In fact, somebody had just sent me an email here, a friend of mine, Morgellons disease from poly-based resins. Is that an artifact of, or a part of? Could it be part of whatever they're spraying up there?
I don't know for sure, but when you have a delivery mechanism that is secret and global, sure could be. It sure could be. These people have no problem. They're doing, you know, large-scale experiments without, you know, getting, you know, consent and release form from the participants. They just don't do that. And the other thing
you and I didn't get the memo. Sorry about that.
We did not get the memo, and we didn't get the bugs, thank God. The other thing that works with the Morgellons is the monatomics enormous. It works very, very well. It's smaller than the bug. It's smaller than the Morgellons.
Wait, so say that again. What is it?
The Ormus, or the monatomics. The monatomics.
Oh, okay.
MONATOMICS, monatomics. And that works very well with the Morgellons, for the body to be able to handle that toxin that it's got in and then begin to regenerate on the other side. because these things go in and begin to just chew through bones. They open up holes in the brains. They chew things away. And the body is literally thrown into a tizzy and does not know how to repair itself. And this is where the monatomics and Ormus and the cannabis just does wonders. You bring these two together, and this is why this stuff has been illegal for so long. It's because it's the answer.
Okay.
The stuff they feed you is not the healthy stuff.
Right. And I think we should, in the closing, in the time we have left here of our show, if we don't spend a little bit of time on telling people how they can protect themselves or how they can bolster, fight against this, I think we'd be remiss. So
I agree.
So go ahead and yeah. So how do you, Scott, knowing what you know, how do you fight against this, or physically?
The big thing is your attitude. Your attitude. Because
Really?
once you go angry, once you go pissed off, that sets the tone for your body. And your body goes into a defensive mode. The hormones are a little off, the adrenaline is there, the cortisones aren't right. So the first thing that you must do is accept that it's happening, and you can't get pissed off that it is happening, simply because you can't change it. So be okay with it happening, and knowing that there's a greater force, a much, much greater force, that has allowed this to happen. Otherwise it wouldn't be happening. God has allowed this to happen, and he's okay with it because it's happening. So that's the first thing you have to get behind you. And this took me a while, to be honest with you, and it still does at times, because they're droughting us here in the West, and we've had the potential for maybe 3 to 4 inches worth of summer rains here in the mountains of Colorado, and we've gotten maybe a half an inch. And the water's still out there, the storms are around, but they're messing with them every day. So your attitude is key. The second one,
all right,
is the monatomics, because and that comes in. Let's back up. Let's go with diatomaceous earth, because that's a larger structure. Let's start with the bigger. It's basically called seashell flour, and if you Wikipedia diatomaceous earth, you will see the picture of these incredible sea-dwelling organisms that, and with all of their varied shapes, are very good at picking up radiation out of the body, whether they're hot particles or not. It can pick it up and flush it out of the body, and other toxins as well, especially the heavy metals. So diatomaceous earth and zeolites are very good for taking those other larger toxins out. And then
we should warn people, though, don't go to your swimming pool store and grab a bag of diatomaceous earth. You're talking about food grade or medicinal grade, right? Or are you talking about
food grade is good, and it's not very expensive. I think it's $30 for 50 pounds worth, and I believe the website is earthworks.com. They come out of Nebraska. It's a family company, and then they source it locally or source it here in the States. And, they deliver FedEx, and so get 50 pounds for under $50, and it'll last you probably the rest of your life.
Jeez. Now, what do you do with that? Do you mix it up in fluid or juice or something and drink it, or
a teaspoon in a smoothie or in a glass of milk? Stir it and drink it in the morning, and then it just helps. See, we have to do things low dose but continually, and then that keeps the body in good shape. It helps deal with allergies. It'll help deal with other issues that might come up as well. Is to get that stuff out of your body, and then Ormus. And that's something that I've become intimately familiar with, and I work with a company called Blue Water Alchemy. And my partner in this project, because it is so important in the increase in consciousness of the human race, what it can do for plants, the food stream is huge. The food stream, using it in your gardens is amazing, because you'll see what Ormus can do with your plants. Their lifespan is so much shorter than the human lifespan or animal lifespan that I mean, you'll get Swiss chard that's 3 foot tall and 2 foot across. The leaves are that big. You'll get tomatoes that actually taste good again, and they're healthy. Your crop yields from anything in the garden will go up at least 50%. Some will almost double, and then the quality of the food just goes through the roof. It'll last longer in the fridge afterwards. And we haven't really talked about this, so I don't know if we should, but using the monatomics and Ormus on GMO foods, GMO plants in gardens, it will begin to undo the geoengineering, or the engineering that's been done to the organisms. It will unwind Monsanto's handiworks. That's the beautiful thing with Ormus. And for us, it deals with our correct cellular regeneration. So we started talking about the 300 billion cells that you and I need to do every day. These monatomic elements will go in and cell by cell, chromosome by chromosome, DNA to DNA, and let the body communicate along the DNA almost 5-fold times faster. With the iridium element dropped into the end of each one of your DNAs, you can move nearly 1 million electrons along that twisted pair of wire, which is your DNA. Without it, you can move maybe 10,000. So this is a huge increase, and it is the iridium element. And it's funny because the powers that be called that satellite telephone system in the sky iridium. Gold is another element that you'll find in Ormus. Ruthenium, element 44, allows for the genetic recombination. So if you're dealing with Morgellons, if you're dealing with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancers, this recombination of your genetics allows your body the two-way communication to see that A, there's a tumor there, and B, to say, we don't want it. It needs to be shut off. And that can happen.
Wow. And folks, Scott, I just want to direct people to your website, weatherwars.info. And what we're talking about now, the Ormus, you've got a section here, Blue Water Alchemy, and that's where people can find this, correct? Information about this Ormus?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
We talked about our healthcare expenses. These two things can cut this country's healthcare expenses in half. We need healthcare for births, accidents, emergency surgeries, and deaths. That's about it. Almost everything else can be done outside of a hospital when you're healthy.
When you're healthy, and that's the key. I was looking through, before your appearance, I was looking through the Blue Water Alchemy, and of course you've got a website as well, bluewateralchemy.com as well, but people can find and get what they need via this website, via your website at weatherwars.info, correct?
Yep.
I mean, people can, okay.
Yep. For the garden, look at the Gaia's Harvest Ormus. It's not too late. We have farmers that'll, getting 3 cuttings of alfalfa. When they use Ormus, they'll get 4. The cool thing is that when the livestock go to eat the alfalfa, they'll eat a third less because their nutritional demands have been met. When you reintroduce these elements that are stuck in the oceans now because we haven't had salt water inland in so many centuries. We haven't had an oceanic inundation. So we've had here in the United States essentially 26,000 years of rain and snow. All of these elements, many of these elements, say 95+%, have been rinsed out of the soil, into the streams, and into the oceans. So at Blue Water Alchemy, we grab salt from the oceans, and we order salt from the Himalayas or the Andes, New Zealand, California, off the coast of France. Not so much in the North Pacific anymore. We've got stockpiles of that, but just not much anymore because of Fukushima. You alkalinize that saltwater bath, and from that, these elements that are released by the lattice work, which is the crystal nature of the salt crystal. When that crystal forms, it needs a condensation nuclei. It needs something to condense around. And so that's these elements. So you dissolve the salt, you alkalinize the salt water. And as that alkalinization happens, as the pH comes from about 6.7 up to about 10.8, these elements are vaulted. They lose their outer valences. They don't react. They don't behave like metals. Lead doesn't behave like a metal. Gold doesn't behave like a metal, nor does iridium, ruthenium, rhodium. They all behave like superconducting ceramics. So when you take them internally, they're not interacting with other, with your body. They're going in and finding where they need to be in the body, and then allowing for this incredibly effective communication within your body organism. And a really cool side effect is your dreamscape. Your nighttime dreams become lucid as you begin to, deal with lessons and experiences that you don't necessarily want to do on the outer here. You might as well work them out in the dream world. Get that work done. And another thing for guys, if you're married, be careful, because fertility will go through the roof. Be careful.
Wow.
Yeah. We've had numerous couples who couldn't have kids. They're like, oh, my God, she's 2 months pregnant. When did that happen? And then they have brilliant babies with high IQs. They're walking by 9 months old. They're talking by 16 months. There's something happens when the sperm brings the correct genetic package to the egg, and those monatomics are there for the baby to develop, and with mother's nursing. They're phenomenal, brilliant children.
Wow.
I think that's why the ancients loved it so much.
We just went through the whole gambit here. We went from the problem, to identifying the problem, the issues, and of course the available solutions. And to me, nothing is more important than solutions. We need to live to fight another day, and we certainly quality of life is important. And I was reading the customer testimony or the client testimonials, customer testimonies on your website. With that, it's thank you for offering that solution to the issues that we have.
And what we can't do is do anything medical. That's just not something we put up there. We have so many of those. But it's just, there was a time when we had free speech in the United States. But that time has passed. That time has passed.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
We have his opinions.
Well, now, and all of this is done without vaccines. We hear how bad they are for our bodies and such, and I know you can't make any medical statements, but all this without necessarily vaccines against the flu, for example, or against whatever disease, pick a disease. But my goodness, so this is all. Is it homeopathic? Is that what it is? Or naturopathic?
No, it's a little more than that. I mean, dosing would be. There are some people who are very sensitive and will feel the energy that comes in with the Ormus after it just drops. I'm not one of those persons. I need, half an ounce to an ounce daily. And then I get that kind of sustaining warm glow. And we kind of have people not take it before bed because of the energy and the awareness that comes in. So they're, kind of going to bed, and they're all of a sudden they're processing their life. They're processing things because connections are being made, understandings are happening, lights are going off, awareness is coming in. And Ormus tends to go through you and your life and from the present time kind of backwards. So it may take you 2 or 3 years of being on Ormus to finally process, adulthood through childhood in its entirety. I'm 4 years on it now, and just finishing dealing with, my parenting, the group, my parents. It's just, there's this stuff that I thought I'd put away and wasn't a big deal, but then I'm seeing how it colored how I viewed life, colors how I interact with people, and how relationships develop or don't develop. So, it's not just about detoxing. There's a lot more to it, to be honest with you. There's a lot more to it. Because what happens is these elements come in. There's actually a counterpart of it, a counterpart to each one of these trillions of elements that resides in the etheric realm, will reside in in your light body or in your energy body. And as that connection is made, when cells then need to reproduce, it says, I'm not quite right, but I see my template in the etheric body. And it can pull that information into the physical and then manifest the cell correctly from that. And that is how it works on the physical body, is by that open communication between the physical body and your etheric or your spirit body. Because it's just right here. Yeah, it's all available. It's just getting the right tools to bring it in, to call it forth, if you will. So,
wow. Well, I'll tell you what. You go ahead, Joe.
As we're seeing these chemtrails continue to increase in frequency and across the United States, and I'm sure in various parts of the world, we see the toxins that are in our food that are considered poisons in many other countries, the vaccines, all of these ingredients, from what I see, play into what you talked about, a immune system breakdown of the immune system. Now, we know that there are natural remedies to this. We know that there are supplements, vitamins, nutrients, but is there a real foolproof or way to protect from all this chemical intake rate we have, aside from what people suggest for each individual? I mean, you talked about the different chemicals in the chemtrails. I mean, the barium, the aluminum, all have different effects. Memory loss. Somebody asked us if memory loss is something that comes with this. We see people that are being more confused lately. It seems like things are getting worse. Maybe effects are getting worse also, which leads me to my next point: sterilization.
It's cumulative. It's all cumulative.
That's the word.
That's the word.
I'm sorry.
No, it's and honestly, people are losing it. People are losing it. I mean, we've got zombies eating people in Miami. We've got, I don't know, probably even in your own very close friends and family, there's 2 or 3 of them that are like, what's up with them? I mean, what's with all this anger from them? What's going on with them?
I say that what's up with them about my in-laws all the time, Scott, but that's a different matter. But no, you're right. You know what? The impatience, the anger, the attitude, I can feel it. I can feel it.
It's everywhere. It's pervasive through society. And you turn on TV, and it's there. It's murder, it's rape, it's revenge, it's all of those lower energies, those base chakra energies is where they want us. They want us in fear. They want us confused. They want us deer in the headlights, not knowing what to do. Because, trust me, they're in the car. The lights may or may not be on, but either way, it's coming towards you. Some people will see it. Most will not.
Scott, I got to ask you this because this has always bugged me. What did they do? In other words, they've got to live in the same planet we do. How do they protect themselves? I mean, aren't they poisoning themselves too?
Well, I'm not dead, you're not dead, and they're not dead. So, you know, if we want to go binary weapons, then they probably already have a vaccine that they're dealt with. They're already controlled their food intake. I can tell you, they don't eat Del Monte. They don't eat Sara Lee. They don't eat Nabisco stuff. They don't eat General Mills. They just don't. They know better. And so, they look at us as being carved up for steak on the table. That's how they view us, as animals. And so there's a whole different agenda, and how they value life. They're very different kinds of people. And I've come into more and more material. How do we want to get here?
Well, you don't have to go anywhere you want to go.
No, it's just I don't know that we have time to get into it.
Well, we got about 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, there are other planets where there are races of beings that know about Earth, that know that Earth is this Garden of Eden, and they want it. They can't have it until we're gone. All of us. every last single one of us. And
That's
this
what
is
they
a
say.
common
Yeah.
this is a common struggle across the universe. When a planet develops, given enough time, given non-interference, you'll have two races of beings that ultimately prevail. One is reptilian, and one is the human mammalian. And rarely, in very rare circumstances, can they get along. But ultimately, one will exterminate the other. And humans are in a very delicate place in our evolvement, where right now we believe the heart and the religious experience via emotion is the top of the pyramid. And it's not. So we're stuck in the lower part of the heart, in the fear, in the jealousy, in the lack. I don't have enough of this. I don't have enough of that. I need food. I need this. We're in that kind of mentality. We haven't moved through that. So that leaves the human population at our present state of development very susceptible to fear-based programming. And that is where this other race of beings has come in. They've taken their energy bodies and chosen to incarnate on Earth so they can be those soldier minions, to this other planet from afar and try to subvert and undo our progress. Not slightly, but completely.
When you say that, Scott, could we be talking about the, shall we say, the Cain lineage, or pardon? Reptilian?
There's a reptilian agenda, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
right, okay.
I mean, absolutely. Okay. I mean, there's our cortex. We have that in our brain. There's an aspect of that in us. And so, but these reptilians, their genetics are not sensitive to those higher spiritual energies, to the compassion, to the love.
Right.
They're just not open to it. They don't see it. They don't feel it. They don't see the value to it. They're very sensual, sexual, dominating, controlling. If you're not birthing and nursing your young, you have a very different connection to your young, to how your race propagates. And so it's that energy that wants Earth, and it's a collection of planets in the northern sky. It's a collection in the constellation Draco, actually. But they're so mental that they can project, they can inhabit bodies. They're very good at occult magic, and that's why that imagery is all over the Illuminati. It's that occult magic.
And there you have it. See, folks, why do we talk about the Luciferian agenda, the Illuminati, the powers, the unseen powers? And look how nicely Scott has tied all this together. I mean, wow.
They want our world, and they want our hearts and minds. And then once they have our hearts and minds, then they could wipe us away. And they have our planet. They have our planet.
Unbelievable. Wow.
Yep.
Scott, I hope we're out of time for our show tonight. I can't believe it's gone so quickly. Will you come back again?
Absolutely.
And we can get into other issues much deeper. Do you have any books, any DVDs, anything like that available?
No, I don't, and that's a conscious decision. So, I've been pressed to do a book, but every time I think it'd be time to write a book, this whole next download of information about what they're doing and why they're doing it shows up. So we'd be constantly revising it, and it wouldn't be complete. So interviews are good. Interviews are good.
You certainly are fighting a battle on a much different level than most people are, and it's an information war that we're up against. And I like you. By the way, I like your answer. You're not in this to convince anybody. It's you're going to have to, come to your own. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And
do it yourself.
And I got to tell you, man, that's how I mean, no one could convince me of anything. I was like a stubborn, 13-year-old.
You and me both.
But I got to tell you, man, after looking at your website, I've got to tell you, you've really convinced me that this is something that we've really got to get into some more. You've been a wonderful guest, Scott, and I just want to thank you so much, and we'll have you back again. Again, we're up against the top of the end of the show, and I just want to thank you so very much. Your website is weatherwars.info, weatherwars.info, and folks, Scott,
check out Blue Water Alchemy as well, because that pays the bills.
Blue Water Alchemy.
Yep.
Okay, indeed, we're gonna hard link them both. God bless you, my friend. Thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you. I'll be back.
All right, sir. Great. Wow, Joe, that's
I want to thank you
interview.
for really conducting the interview, because I was sitting back just listening to what he was talking about and absorbing it all. And it's just a lot of what he said validated everything that I've researched. And I really would like to get into more of the things that we didn't get into, but we can do that another time.
Yeah, we certainly can.
It was a very excellent interview, a great topical subject matter that is affecting our world, that's affecting our health, our behavior, and we need to find the way to combat this. And I saw comments in the chat room, and people say, this about the food, our food's poisoned and our air's poisoned, and how do we combat this? Well, pray over it all, and trust in the Lord, because He will protect you from these things.